And we are the Coalition, loud and proud, outrage porn-free, civilly disobedient media, broadcasting live on the worldwide Coalition Media Network here at the GoLocalLive Broadcast Center, deep in the heart of the city we love, Providence, Rhode Island. Facebook.com/The Coalition Radio, on the Mighty Twitter at Coalition_radio, and of course, the mothership at CoalitionRadio.us. Tonight we've got quite the lineup. We're going to span the immigration issue, we're going to touch on education, and then in our final section, we're going to deal with local politics as it affects one of our sister cities, Woonsocket, Rhode Island. But let's get right to, I believe, one of the more remarkable stories that I've read about in recent memory. Imagine one day if you woke up in your city, right here in the United States, was at the epicenter of a humanitarian crisis. And of course, I'm talking about what's going on in the borders with refugees struggling up from Central and Latin America for a number of reasons. Political, economic, narco-terrorism, boiling down really to nothing less than a simple desire to enjoy the freedoms and liberties that we have here in the United States that we were so blessed to be born into. Now imagine, if you will, along that southern border, tales of horror really had spun up from both the media and from first-hand accounts. Children, separated in some cases from their families, being warehoused in revolting conditions certainly that are not what you and I typically associate with life in the United States. Situations so dire that if in fact happened amongst the general populace, there would be a huge outcry. And that's ultimately what ensued. And it brings to rise, if you will, the central question. What happens? What is the individual responsibility that you and I have towards our brothers and sisters? Are we so mired in this great political divide in this nation that despite staring suffering right in the face, right through the eyes of children, that we have to maintain our stoicism politically, that we have to stick with our talking points, that the heated rhetoric that's taken over our national conversation must be left intact, because we certainly can't acknowledge fault for what's happening right now as we speak here in the United States. Because to do so, to interrupt that rhetoric, would effectively assign personal responsibility. And so the moral transitions that's taken place between both sides of the aisle, one blaming the other, one pointing towards some type of justification because somehow the other side had operated similarly at some point in history, has replaced the moral dialogue that takes place. Now, tonight's not a night for political conversation in this segment. We'll leave that to other folks. What I'd like to do tonight is celebrate the human spirit. Folks know me as being fairly cynical about politics. Even the most stone-hearted individual, though, seeing these situations and seeing how the people of Deming, New Mexico have responded, would somehow, even with their inner Grinch, find that tiny little heart and find it to start to swell and explode. Joining me for the first time is Ariana Saludares. Folks, you'll forgive my very bad Spanish. All right, is from Deming, New Mexico. She married her husband.
Thanks for having me.
She married her husband Brandon in 2008 in Washington State, where he served as a member of this nation's military with great distinction. They moved to Arizona and now reside back in Deming, New Mexico, where Ariana cares for her 89-year-old grandmother. She has 2 children, and they center their extra time on community activism. Ariana has been volunteering and skating with roller derby teams since 2008, and currently skates with nationally ranked Crossroads Roller Derby out of Lucreces, New Mexico. Her other passion is working with children, introducing the art. Ariana comes from a family of educators, artists, and most notably, humanitarians. Ariana represents, in this case, an organization called Colores United, which is a private organization that she's going to give us a little bit background on. But she represents very, very aptly the members of this organization. Ordinary folks, folks who have served our country, folks who have families, who, in a sense, put part of their life on hold to work with people who find themselves struggling to get to the United States for, quite frankly, the very same reasons that we live here. Ariana, welcome to the coalition. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
So let's talk about Deming, New Mexico. I mean, in one sense, it's a remarkable town based on what we're going to talk about tonight, but it's very typical southwestern United States town, isn't it? I mean, give us a little background.
It is hot. Right now, it's probably close to 100 and some or more degrees. The wind blows down here. We are 33 miles from the Mexican border, just north of the Mexican border. We have a town of about 14,000 people. We have a lot of agricultural. That's one of our main trades out here. And a lot of people work on the highway, work with the government. We're right off of a major interstate, I-10. And so because of that, we have a lot of through traffic, but not many residents.
That proximity to the border and that type of difficult landscape and that, quite frankly, that kind of extensive heat. Are you the very first, if you will, real quote-unquote town folks are going to run into when they cross?
If they just so happen to cross in the Columbus, on the Columbus Highway, there is a Port of Columbus, and that is, it shares the border with Palomas, Mexico. So right on one side is Palomas, right on the other is Columbus, and then 33 miles further is going to be Deming, New Mexico.
So what happened? One day you folks woke up. You know, there's been a steady stream of border crossings, quite frankly, as long as I've been alive. It's part of the immigration landscape, sadly. We can't seem to get our act politically. Again, that's a show for another time. But living in Deming, has border crossings been a persistent part of your civic life there?
Personally, we would cross the borders ourselves to go into Mexico for trade, but we are so very close to the border that, you know, we have a lot of Border Patrol. I have friends who are married to Border Patrol agents. My husband got job offers with the Border Patrol. It is a part of our town. It is just like you would see a postman driving by. We have Border Patrol driving by.
Right. So it's very much so. There's no, on a local level, in Deming at least, there's no great divide. There's no us versus them mentality. It's really folks coexisting on a larger level, isn't it?
I believe so. Our school system is very unique in that it extends all the way down to Columbus, to the border. We also have children who come from Palomas, Mexico, for any one reason or another. Maybe they are citizens, but their parents are not, and they are bused to our school systems. There's a lot of high school students that are citizens but may live in Palomas, Mexico, that are also, students of the Deming Public Schools. So we have such a proximity. We're so close. It's hard not to blur the two.
Right. So, again, more community, less us versus them. When did folks or when did folks start to see the refugee population explode? At what point in time did this become, Houston, we have an issue here?
The night before Mother's Day, 35 women, children, family units were dropped off at the Members gas station. And that is just a gas station that just so happens to have a Greyhound bus stop on it.
Right.
And they were dropped there by Border Patrol. And then some of the parishioners of a Catholic church, which is St. Anne's Catholic Church, were became aware of them being there, saying, "Hey, you know what? These people they don't speak English. I don't think that they know what they're doing there." So a couple other people got together with their vehicle to try and bring them closer to the church. It's not a surprise, but they weren't trusting of hey, come on with us, come into our van, you know. So what they ended up doing was convincing this entire group of 35 people to walk down to the Catholic Church for sanctuary for the night, and that was about a mile. The women and children were convinced to go ahead and get into the personal vehicles, and then the rest of the crew ended up walking the mile. That was the night before Mother's Day. Then I was receiving a call from a really good friend and also a co-founder of Colores United that there was this situation, and because of the humanitarian work that I do in the community, she knew that I collect shoes for children in Deming. And she got on the phone with me and she said, "Ariana, you have to come, and you have to come now. These children, they need clothes, they need shoes, they need so much more." Hung up the phone and I looked to my husband and I said, "I know it's Mother's Day and I know that you have a plan for us today, but we have to go. Please let us spend Mother's Day." So we all got into our van and we went over there to the location. The fairgrounds by that time is where they had been moved to. And we were able to see immediately that they needed so much more than clothing. And so that's how it initially began, and that's how I ended up getting involved.
How had these folks arrived there? Had they been brought over by folks who were trafficking individuals? Had they crossed the border themselves? Do we know that? Do we understand how this first wave got there?
From what we know, as far as asylum seekers, is that they are here legally in the United States. Well, they have legal status.
Right.
That means that they have expressed concern that any of their any time they return back to their home country, their life is in danger. And so they then normally, once they cross the border, they declare that they are looking for asylum at the port of entry. After that, they are processed through Border Patrol, sometimes handed over to ICE, but Border Patrol processes them, and then they receive their legal status. Then they are free to go to what is their sponsor. Every single person that comes to Deming has already been given legal status and has a sponsor. So, however, from what I understand, the only responsibility that the Border Patrol has is that they are to be delivered to the closest or to the nearest bus stop, which in our little tiny town at 10:30 at night was a gas station.
Wow. So these are folks who had obviously traveled a long way.
Correct.
You're talking about right now a temperature of being somewhere in north of 100 degrees. The border is certainly not a tourist-friendly environment by any stretch, and they're lacking really basic. We're talking very basic needs, aren't we? We're talking about food, shelter,
Clothing.
water, potentially medicine of some type, and that depends what toll the crossing took on them. And then, equally important, there's, here they are. They've got somewhere in the United States, they do have a sponsor, the ability to contact that sponsor so that arrangements can be made so that folks can meet their sponsors. Tell us a little bit about that process.
Every single person has a story, every family. Some of them are, some of their journeys are much easier than others. Some of them are heartbreaking. I've spoken to plenty of people who walked with their children for miles, who hopped on the back of buses or were given shelter by farmers on the side of the road. I mean, it's insane. However, the difference is that every single person has the sponsor to go to in the United States. When they get to Deming, they have no idea where they are. Most of them are beyond shocked that they are so close to the Mexican border in the state of New Mexico. Once they come to us, we then contact their sponsor, let their sponsor know that they are being cared for. They're getting showers, they're getting food, they're safe. And then their sponsor could then work on getting them their ticket, be it by bus, by airplane, or by rail. And then we work with where they're getting to and transport them. So we have kind of arranged with a lot of the sponsors to send them out of El Paso. Well, El Paso, Texas is 2 hours away. So we here in Deming have been transporting every single day to El Paso at least once a day. Some of them go out of the bus station here in Deming, and that's not hard. That's a mile away. But for a long time, we were scheduling the buses to leave at 6 in the morning, sometimes even 1 in the morning. And a lot of those times, the buses would just pass on by, regardless of there being a ticketed passenger here in our little tiny town.
I can't imagine how many stories, if you will, how many tales there are. But are there, in terms of just trying to paint within the time frame that we have, a broad brush, what are some of the circumstances that are creating this need to leave a country that, quite frankly, had been home to their families for untold generations? What's happening in their native countries that all of a sudden they just have to leave? Give us a few stories, a little bit of background, because my goal here is to humanize these folks.
There's a woman that I spoke with who had been. She had a bed. We had given each herself and her 2 children, who were under the age of 12, cots to sleep on. And it was about 11:30 at night. And I walked over to her and I asked her how she was doing. And I talked to her a little bit about her travel. And it had taken her 3 months to get from Honduras to Deming. And she said that the reason that she left there was because they had gone ahead and killed some of her family members, and she didn't have a way to make money, and she was concerned for her children, and she felt that if she stayed there, that her 2 children, who were so very gifted, would die. So she made the trek. And she was one of the ones who said that they walked part of the way. They rode the bus part of the way. They asked for farmers to give them shelter part of the way. They've climbed. Just recently, I was told about a woman who left from Honduras, who they came upon a muddy hill, and I know for a fact she has 1 child who's about 18 months old, and she explains her story as holding on to the rock on the side and sliding down, trying to claw her way over to get to safety, to get to high ground. These people are risking their lives and their children's lives. No mother, especially being a mother myself, you wouldn't do that without a genuine concern. And the main concern is they are not safe. Their countries are not safe for them to return to.
Is a lot of this narco-terrorism? Is it governments that are dictatorships, a combination of the two?
I haven't really gotten into it because one of the things about sharing those details is they are healing when they come to us. They are in shock, different stages of shock. And our goal in Deming, especially in our shelter, is to welcome them with open and safe arms and do what we can to help them heal. And so most of them have shared the story and some of the hardships on how they've gotten here, and why. But a lot of them, I think they're not ready to go into the specific reasons, other than their life is in danger. They're in fear of dying. Their family members have been murdered, which is some of the stories that we hear, and they cannot make it there. And this is their only chance.
Right, and if there is a universal anywhere amongst our conditions as human beings, it's a mother's desire at great, or perhaps even the ultimate personal cost, to protect her children. That doesn't matter or differ whether you're someone who was born in Boston, someone who was born in Venezuela. It's ultimately a mother will literally do anything to protect her children or to get them out of harm's way. If you're just joining us, by the way, you are with the Coalition. As always, we're loud and proud and outrage porn free. Tonight we're sitting here in a little bit of awe. Joining us for the first time is Ariana Saludares. She is a resident of Deming, New Mexico, where they have established and we're going to get into a little bit of the structure now, and as a result also your need to contribute to said structure, a refugee care center, a refugee shelter for folks who somehow, against great odds and often great personal expense, have traveled from some of the most difficult countries in the hemisphere to the United States, seeking the same things that we all do. You know, it sounds almost cliche: life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, safety for a family, the opportunity to see one's children grow. And I would point out to the naysayers, quite frankly, we as Americans, by accident of birth, nothing less, find ourselves accustomed to these benefits, to this style of living. All these folks are trying to do is desperately find an opportunity, a way to pursue the same lives for their children that we already enjoy, again, through accident of birth. Nothing else. So, again, thank you for joining me. Colores United, that had existed prior to the refugee crisis, hadn't it?
It was a dream. That's one of the things that's really neat is I will say that this project here was a driving force to move forward with the project. Myself and our co-founders, who are honorary members, are also our husbands through maybe being volunteered. But through their support, we needed to move forward on this. We found that there was so much more that we can do for this, for the refugees. The project that we work with is called Proyecto Mariposa, which is Project Butterfly. The reason why we call it Project Butterfly is one day while I was right about to make a speech in front of the Unitarian Universalists out in Silver City, I kept on seeing the symbolism of a butterfly. And as you know, the monarch butterfly's migration pattern is very similar to the course that a lot of our Central America and along the Mexican the borders all the way to the United States. And it's very similar. As a matter of fact, the butterfly takes many of the same roads simply just because that is the way that the land lays. And so that is why we call it Proyecto Mariposa, because they are too in a sense of transformation. And they eventually, once they're here, will become something so much more, as would a butterfly from a caterpillar.
Wonderful. Now, let's talk about a little bit about structure so people understand. You folks are a private organization, but you work very closely with and in cooperation with a very supportive, almost typical town structure, if you will. And in fact, in the run-up to the show, when I publicized that, I included some links from the local Deming, New Mexico paper that talks about the town council allocating funds as well, I believe, for the creation of the shelter and supporting it. Give us a little background on how it all come together, because there's a lesson here. I'm a libertarian. We're an individualist. We see great beauty and strength in individuals like yourselves coming together to attack some of the most desperate problems in society without having to wait for a government or something to do it. But you've got this spirit of cooperation here, don't you? And in fact, you've really got a spirit of cooperation with the Border Patrol as well. It's quite the little, for lack of a better term, ecosystem that you folks have worked out to address this crisis. Tell us a little about it.
Absolutely. We had to. There was no other way. If for any reason all of us didn't come together, then we would have all of these people on the streets. Now, that may not be a concern for many, but as of this morning, 9,100 people, plus or minus, have come through Deming. And that may not be a lot of people for LA or a huge metropolitan area, but for Deming, New Mexico, that is huge. We don't have the resources. Stores don't open on a Sunday. Things close after 7 p.m. There's bankers' hours. There's only McDonald's open after 10 p.m. I mean, we are a small town, so 9,100 people. We had to do something. The number one, we ended up getting so many different grassroots volunteers to just pitch in. Everybody came out, their trucks lined up with supplies, with food, with everything you could imagine. And then that ended up forming into the city, the county, all working together and kind of waiting until we got the authorization from the state to step in with the medical resources. And with any type of additional funding, contacting the governor, letting her know that that's something that is important, getting her word that she was going to continue to fight for reimbursement of any of the expenses that we have had to incur as a town through county and city to be able to continue this. And our townspeople are still contributing. Not only are our town, but neighboring towns. Hidalgo County, which is close to us as well, lent us a mobile command center that had air conditioning that we were able to run telecommunication out of. Las Cruces, which is also close to us. Grant County, which has, Doña Ana, which is Las Cruces county. We had Silver City, which is to our north side. So many people, so many community members, doctors that just came down in droves. On a Saturday, when we had our highest numbers, I would count 150 individual volunteers that came down to assist. Mm-hmm. And they did so without much request, other than they knew that this needed to happen, and they were there to support.
No, it's astonishing. And the churches and the communities, too, have lent a great deal of support, I assume?
Absolutely. Almost every single church in our town has sent volunteers, cooks on a weekly basis, packs extra lunches for those who are traveling, that they became donation points. There's so many different ways that all of the churches in our area have come together. And on my typical day, for example, would be I needed to contact the Methodist Church because they received donations, where the Baptist Church 2 blocks further north has donations to drop off to us. And then the Catholic Church has volunteers for us, and they're also making the food, where the Unitarian Church is bringing down items. And what it really has done is, through a series of unfortunate events, brought our community so much more closer. There is no doubt in my mind that this will never be forgotten. I'm not 100% sure what the long-term effect is, but I'll tell you one thing. The people came together. And yes, of course, there are those that don't feel the same way, that are quite outspoken in our community, that don't want them here, that spend hours behind their computer writing just horrible things about the guests and those who assist. Mm-hmm. But, one of the things that I continue to remind others is they may be louder, but our actions show what we're doing.
I can't imagine at this point, let me step back. Through recent history, marginalized groups, once given the opportunity to have some level of normalized relations, and I'm talking about across the board, people of color, folks who might have different sexual orientations. Once folks just simply get to know each other, those walls are often broken down. And you start to see people not as a member of a group, but as individuals with their own stories, their own challenges, and their own dreams. And that may sound Pollyannish, but quite frankly, that's how it's worked. Are you starting to see perhaps some softening amongst these folks as they see families who are struggling to come to the United States for the very reasons that we're so proud of the United States?
I believe so. There's a couple of different instances. For example, early on, when they were looking for somebody to assist with the volunteers, I gladly just threw my phone number out there, my cell number, and I didn't really understand at the time how huge that would be. But from day 2, my phone rings constantly, beginning at around 7 p.m. Eastern time and all the way to, I would say, about 9 p.m. Alaska time. It is constant, through voicemails, text messages, emails, communications through Facebook, every single social media that you can think of. And part of it is to ask what they can do. What can I do to help? How can I volunteer? But a lot of it is, 2 other parts of it is trying to get some understanding of what's going on. Mm-hmm. Those calls are great. I'm not saying that that I enjoy them, but because they're very hard. A lot of the time I'm met with resistance, but I realize that it is an opportunity to teach, and they're asking a question for a reason, and I feel that those calls that we receive are so important, because I'm hoping that the reason they called was because there was an iota of care somewhere deep down, and to hear the truth, to hear some of the stories is so very important. Those specific calls take around 10 to 15 minutes to handle, but I feel that if we can change one person's opinion, then when they get met with opposition themselves, then they'll be able to share what they have heard. Now, the other part of the calls that I receive are a lot of the volunteers, dealing with the trauma that they have seen. Because I don't know if you've ever worked in a homeless shelter or volunteered in a soup kitchen, but it really does something to you, not when you're working and when you're hard doing physical labor, but when you're by yourself and you have time to think. That is the time where a lot of our volunteers weren't expecting to get the emotions come over them. And so we also deal with that, myself and Monica, and a lot of the director, Ray Trejo, is his name, of the shelter. So we also field those because those too are important. How can you not have feelings? How could you not look at like, for example, today I was watching a volunteer. He actually works with the Save the Children organization, and he had a little boy, probably less than 2, and he had him in his arms, and he was bouncing him, and he took him over to the mirror, and they were just looking at each other in the mirror. And how could that not affect you? And so those are some things that are really, really deep, that we're also seeing from a lot of the volunteers. It is hitting so deep inside them that it is both traumatic to the volunteers, but it also drives them to continue to volunteer and to continue to donate.
When we spoke last night for the first time, you talked about the restorative process, the healing process that individuals who've gone through such great trauma. Because let's not forget that not everyone makes it across the border. And some stories we'll never know. These are the folks who's, we've seen the pictures, of that father and that daughter, that sort of universal moment of any man who's ever had a daughter, having that daughter cling to him in her last moments. As provocative as that is, as challenging as that is, there are so many stories we will just simply never see. Talk to me about the healing process that takes place simply by these folks who have come across the border being in the company of folks who simply care.
It begins immediately, and that's one of the things that I let the volunteers know. One of the most important times is meeting the Border Patrol paddy wagons. There's no better term for them. They don't come in comfortable vehicles. They come in paddy wagons.
Right.
Meeting them there, and when the doors open from the officer, children come out, mothers, fathers, teenagers, and the first face that they see it's so important, that they're met with a smile. That's the number one time that is so very important to greet them. The second opportunity, there's opportunity all in between, but another one that is so important is when they freely leave. Being there to wave to them goodbye, to tell them good luck, to tell them congratulations that they've made it. They themselves, when they step off of that Border Patrol van, you can see they're exhausted, they're traumatized, they don't crack a smile. It's emotionally distressing to when they leave us. They have tears in their eyes because they are so happy. They've been treated so well. They give hugs that are they consume your soul. And I'll never forget some of the eyes of those children when they look at me, and it's just beautiful.
And at the same time, understanding across the border how many times people get out of those trucks and don't get that and don't see that. And again, I'm not here to draw on the political issues surrounding it. I'm here to point positives here. I guess the closest term I can come to, it's almost a Christ-like experience, because this is exactly what Jesus would have asked folks to do, to really suspend the feelings of differences, the feelings of superiority, the anger or the hostility that one may still harbor because of this issue, and instead release that and simply look at these people as individuals, as human beings who are desperately in need of just love. It really comes down to that, doesn't it?
Yeah, I don't know many of the other places that hold asylum seekers, because I haven't honestly had the time in my schedule. I've been so busy here, but I want to go and see some of them because I want to feel what it feels like. But one day, what I know is that here in Deming, we do everything possible to begin their healing. We give opportunity to allow themselves to feel. We have them, if they wish, they can help us clean. They can help us cook. They help us organize. They work because they're very grateful that they just so happen to be the ones that when they were loading up, they said, take these to Deming. I think that there's a lot of the times you hear about survivor guilt. I'm fairly positive that there are many that come through or start in a caravan or in a group of people and they get separated. And they always will wonder what happened to so-and-so. I know this is true because they've told me that there was, for example, there was a little girl in the early 3 or 4 weeks with a broken arm. And there was a man who said that he started off his journey in El Salvador together with her parents. And when he started off the journey, she didn't have a broken arm. They, for some reason, were brought back together in Deming, New Mexico, and she had a broken arm. I didn't go into why she had a broken arm, but you could just imagine that every single story and every single path that they have taken, it isn't easy.
Clearly, there's no central database. There's no website that lists these volunteer refugee centers. Anecdotally, have you ever heard of other towns along the border that have reacted to this crisis in the manner that you folks have?
I think we are unique, and I would need to do more research. But if you take a look at some of the facilities that are close to our area, in Tucson, they were staying in a monastery, but they just recently signed a lease to occupy the juvenile detention center. In Yuma, Arizona, in San Diego, in Las Cruces, they are with the Diocese of Las Cruces. In El Paso, they're with the diocese. I don't know of many other places here that have the municipalities working together along with the grassroots effort. I think we do it because we are one and the same. Our mayor, who works with the school district, is there almost every single day because not only does he hold office, but he's also a citizen. Not only am I a mother and a volunteer, but I too am a citizen of this town. Many people in the school district, they dually would go to work and then call us after their shift from working from 7 to 4 and then do another 4 to 10 p.m. just to assist. So I think we are different. I don't know any other town that is of 14,000 who has been able to manage this. It wasn't always easy. It's not been without its trials and its errors, but I think that how you recover from an issue is what matters. And I stopped counting the days because it almost seemed to prolong it. And now it just seems natural. You wake up in the morning, you ask how many people we have, you ask if there's any new ones coming in, and you go straight into work and you figure out what we need to do to help the children begin to heal.
It's a blessing to the town too, isn't it? I mean, there's a sense of purpose, a genuine sense of purpose that you folks have that I think adds so much meaning and value to your lives. That I think in the era of the internet, in the era of disassociation, isolation, marginalization, I would genuinely say as an outsider, I think it's a blessing because there's a focus and a purpose when communities react positively in times of crisis that simply doesn't exist in a lot of our lives anymore. We are all so isolated from each other. We're in chat rooms as opposed to coffee houses arguing. We're arguing with somebody who will never, from whom you may never find common ground, that you may never even meet. And yet, there's real physical contact here. There's emotional contact that takes place on a daily basis. The lesson to your children must be valuable. Because if parents are, they see through action, through lectures or rhetoric or Facebook posts, they see through action their parents completing this of not only getting from the community but giving back so aggressively. It's an incredible life lesson for them. I've got to believe you're creating an entire generation of activists and humanists. What impact has it had on children locally who probably tag along half the time when you folks are doing this stuff?
They do, including my own 8-year-old and my 2-year-old. I tell a funny story that my husband isn't too fond of, but I lost my 2-year-old for 15 minutes in the shelter one day, and I couldn't find her, but I know the facility, so I knew she was in there. I just didn't know where she was. So we eventually had everybody in the shelter looking for her over the loudspeaker. We were saying, okay, you're looking for a little girl. This is what she's wearing. She's somewhere. And eventually one of the mothers says, oh, this one, I thought she was a different refugee. My children look like their children. My son may not speak Spanish fluently, but he plays along just with them. He would constantly call them. He would say, Mom, are we going to go see the homeless shelter today? And I told him, I said, honey, they're not homeless. They have a home, but they're just trying to get there. And he would, nod his head and understand. He understands that they were hungry, but he also understands that they're children just like he is. Mm-hmm. Many townsfolk from all over the United States call us and say, hey, is it inappropriate for my child who is 9 or 7 or 10 or 17 to come out there and assist? And I said, not at all. I think that it's a really good lesson because the children can see that what a certain child has on his cot as he sleeps is everything he has in the world. And that's a very hard concept to understand as a child when they have phones and tablets and rooms bigger than a person's house. Right. In Guatemala. And so to see it there, to see all of those, one simple toy, one simple bag, a pair of shoes, and understand that is all they have to their name, is I think invaluable for a child to learn, including my own.
There's real opportunity here really for us, I think everyone in the nation, on a couple of different levels. First of all, we can look at your community's reaction, behavior, coalescence, and learn from that. But clearly the pictures coming out of South Texas, in particular in Arizona, have created a great deal of outrage amongst Americans, justifiably so. We're not in the blame game here, so let's get to the positive of it. For every individual who is outraged, there really is a very, and they don't happen to live in southern New Mexico or southern Texas, there's a very simple step they can take here, isn't there, to participate in this. And it's quite frankly, it's donations. Because you're running largely off of private donations, there's a potential from some reimbursement from the government, but whether it be the backpacks that you folks give them when they leave, which contain water and supplies, sometimes it's just something as simple as hygienic supplies. This costs money. And so my challenge in our tiny little neck of the woods here, because you're talking to into a state here, Rhode Island, which is probably the size of Greater Phoenix, if that, this tiny little state. For every person who's been outraged about it and feels impotent and doesn't have a way to react, there's a very simple way, isn't there? And what is that?
There are, I say that there's 3 levels of assistance. The first one is free. And the number one thing is to share the message. We post videos often of what's going on through our Facebook page, to share the stories, to click on those. We don't have a YouTube channel where we generate money from that. No, that's not what I'm talking about. But to continue to share the story, if one can't donate, maybe whomever they share the story to can. On Facebook, we currently have a Facebook fundraiser going. We also have a GoFundMe. Being in a younger generation, but not so young that I'm not hip anymore, so that is self-proclaimed, by the way. We also look at Zelle. We look at Venmo. We look at other ways that younger people are looking to donate. $2, $1, all of those things. It costs $3 for a woman to have a pair of leggings to wear that maybe she hasn't taken a shower or changed her clothing in several weeks. And so being able to donate is so huge. And I think that to touch on the those who have anger, it is because they don't know what they can do. And so every single day we hear a lot of anger coming through the phone, and we work on redirecting that anger and saying, look, share these videos, share this artwork that we post on our Instagram, on our Twitter. Look at these stories and understand that all you need to do is share. And if you can donate $1 or $100, then please do, because that directly goes to all of these families. And so there's also a way to volunteer. We're starting a Amazon wish list that you can kind of look and see what you can do, and it gets directly delivered to the Armory, which is where we are. The address of that is 700 South Pearl here in Deming, New Mexico. For a long time, I just had people sending boxes to my house. I think it's funny because almost daily I go out in my front porch and there are new boxes of items. I don't know who it is because a lot of the time it's anonymous. But all I know is every time I pick up those items, I say thank you to them, because obviously they felt that they needed to do that for our guests.
I love that you refer to them not as refugees. They're not immigrants. They're not they're your guests, and that's really the ultimate expression of love. I mean, you treat them as if they were folks, maybe an extended family member, a friend of a friend, who showed up at your home, maybe under good circumstances, maybe under dire circumstances. But the ethos here is that every one of these folks is treated with respect and dignity as a guest.
Well, and that's something that is almost immediately stripped from them when they make the voyage to the United States. Every single step that they take, their dignity is stripped further and further. They're held without baths. They're held without clean clothing. They're held without food. They must ration. I've heard stories of parents having to choose whether to eat or whether to give their children food. And I had a gentleman who didn't eat for 4 days, and he was starving. And so they are our guests. A lot of the time, some of the things that happen online, which is the funniest thing, is because I do read them sometimes, but a lot of those who oppose say, if you want them so bad, then why don't you open your home? And I say, gladly, here's my address. Please send them. And as a matter of fact, I would love to invite you over to dinner too, so you can see how we do hospitality. Anybody who comes into Luna County, anybody who steps into Deming, it's so very important that they are welcomed. You don't just come to Deming for our duck race, which, by the way, is a thing. You don't just come because you always pass through it. One of the things that just reminds me is I need to put a little bit more about our community on our website, the Colores United website, which, by the way, is www.coloresunited.com, COLORES, united.org. I apologize. We have the org and we have the com, but it's the org that's important. Right. And we need to put a little bit more about what Deming is, because so much of who we are is in what we do, and what we do is we treat anybody who comes through here with dignity, with respect. We welcome them. And again, you're probably not going to one day go, I think I'm going to go and visit Deming, New Mexico. You just so happen to pass through. And that is exactly what our guests are doing. They're not staying. They're not spending money or paying taxes into our local economy through stores. They're not doing any of that. They're just stopping by.
Right. Wow. How far is Austin, Texas from you folks?
I think that's about at least 14 to 18 hours away.
A national organization I belong to, the Libertarian Party, again, not to get political, but an organization that really preaches to the type of effort you're making, is holding our national convention there. I wonder if I can get folks to get out there a day early or stay a day longer and do a little bit of a road trip Texas style. Understand that the entire state of Rhode Island is 44 miles tall. So differences in geography are very, very relative here. We've only got a couple of minutes. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, I've heard some amazing stories about what is seen in West Texas when you're driving to El Paso, and it's a bunch of tumbleweeds and no gas stations and pump jacks that are drawing oil, and so it may not be the best road trip, but if you have an opportunity to come here and see what we can do and sit with these children and share your smile, it is so worth it. A lot of the times, anybody who wants to ask if they can come and volunteer, we have them call 575-201-3953. And that is a Google Voice number that myself and our co-founder, Monica, we utilize that because we need two of us to manage the flow and receive text messages, like I said, almost 24 hours a day. And a lot of the times we can't even grab every single one. Text messages, yes. Phone calls, we normally can't grab every one of them because we're also still working at the shelter, and Monica's taking care of her mother, I'm taking care of my grandmother, and we have families. And so it's, but if you have the opportunity while you're down there in Austin, swing on up. You'll see we're not that far away.
Well, the last presidential candidate, the Libertarian Party of America, was your former governor, Gary Johnson, two-term governor, and we've quite a libertarian crew out there, and I'm sharing this video with them as we speak, and let's see if we can motivate people. Do you have a final message? Particularly, and again, I'm so grateful for your time because I know it's so challenged. Do you have a final message, just directed at the humanity of people who might soften their heart a little bit, to look beyond the labels and see folks as just what they are, just plain folks?
I think that it's very simple, and and it is what my mother talks to me about. And we've had this in our family for so very many years, and it is each one reach one. You just change one opinion at a time. You just change one life at a time. Just one at a time. And that makes it so that it's not overwhelming, because if you come and you're inundated with the noise, the sounds, the children's, the stories, the heartache, the heartbreak, you realize that there is so much more, and all you have to do is just start with one life. And when you're done there, you can move on to the next one. It's very simple to be kind. To be kind costs $0, and you can be kind to animals, to people, to your neighbors, and it's very, very simple. I invite everybody, all of the viewers and the listeners, to our website, to our Facebook page, to check us out, and to, if there's anybody who has questions, feel free. I may not get to your email or your text message right away, but it is important, because if I can answer a question to you, then you then can spread that information to someone else, and it just starts with one.
Wow. You've given us a lot to think about tonight. Ariana Saludares, she, of course, is with Colores United. She's from Deming, New Mexico. An entire town that it's decided to take onto itself, not to wait for others, not to look to others, but to assume a level of personal responsibility for supporting folks who have been caught up really in this humanitarian nightmare called the refugee, the immigration crisis, whatever term, whatever cliche you want to apply to it. They've decided themselves that they are going to change the lives of people, and in doing so, clearly have changed their lives, and for folks like us from afar, give us the opportunity to, well, participate in something that, for a very small town, is a lot larger than any of us. So we'll share those links, and again, for all of the folks out there who are justifiably outraged, we're going to give you an opportunity to do more than virtue signal. I guess that's the term these days, virtue signal. We're going to give you an opportunity to more than complain about a particular politician or administration. We're going to give you more than the opportunity to just whine. Give you an opportunity through these folks' hard work to simply contribute a little bit of money, and you've seen firsthand exactly the difference in lives it'll make. And who knows, this could be the pay it forward moment, if you will, of recent times. So I thank you for taking the time away from your lives, your family, and this incredible project that you're involved in, and explaining it all to us so that maybe we can amplify a little bit. All right?
Thank you very much for having me.
All right. Folks, we're going to take a quick break right now, but one of the wonderful parts of having a show like this is you get to meet people who stretch higher, assume greater, work harder, and are such inspiration that, I don't know, you have to look into yourself and say, what can I do? What can I do to be simply better? Folks, we are the Coalition. As always, we are loud and proud. We are terminally outrage porn-free, civilly disobedient media, broadcasting live on the Worldwide Coalition Network here at the GoLocalLive Broadcast Center, deep in the heart of the city we love, Providence, Rhode Island. Facebook.com/The Coalition Radio, on the mighty Twitter at Coalition_Radio, the mothership at CoalitionRadio.us. We're going to take a very quick break. We're going to bring Daryl Gould on, who's going to report from the latest meanderings and goings on over in Bristol Warren. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.